Welcome to Ween Casts. Ween off the cuff. Riverdale, Season 7, Episode 2. Skip, hop, thump. I am your Ween. This episode, the second of Riverdale's seventh and final season, is what some might call a slow episode for Riverdale, in that no one died on screen. But I would call it, more importantly, a homoerotic episode of Riverdale. Also, a meta episode of Riverdale that is, I'm sure, causing my former professor of comics in Riverdale. That's a real thing that happened to me. I did get to take a class in college where I talked about Riverdale, and I had a professor who was interested in Riverdale. So, who's winning? Probably making her do all kinds of crazy backflips because this episode starts with Jughead talking about comic books. Yes. Jughead is like, OMG, comics, everybody loves them, superheroes are over, we like to read horror and crime comics. But then he discovers that Pep Comics, which is a comic book company obviously based in Riverdale, because every small town in the 1950s had its own comic company, right? Making horror and crime comics. They've stolen his story idea that he submitted a while back. So he rushes to school to go talk to his nerd herd, which is Ethel, Ben Button, and Dilton. And he's like, OMG, guys, my comic idea got stolen by Pep Comics, and they don't care. But Jughead cares. So he decides to go to Pep Comics and confront the editor in chief personally. Another plot that's being set up in this cold open is that OMG, it's about to be the school dance sock hop. And obviously, Cheryl's in charge of setting up the sock hop, and she's gotten musical act Kevin and the Crooners to perform. And so obviously Kevin's very nervous because he's got to practice for his barbershop quartet. And of course, Archie is like, OMG, Veronica, will you go with me to the dance? And she's like, maybe, but you have to prove you can dance. And Archie's like, oh shit, I can't dance. And Tony is flirting with Cheryl about the dance and whether they should get Fangs to play at the sock hop instead of Kevin, because let's face it, Fangs is much cooler than Kevin. And Cheryl's having a little bit of gay panic about the experiences that she's having with Tony flirting with her. And there's a little Midge and Fangs tease as well. So back, excuse me, back in the Jughead Comics plotline, he goes to Pep Comics, which is obviously the FBI office set from previous seasons, but now with posters of comics around it. And he demands restitution. And the EIC tells him to let go of his persecution complex, which would not be possible for Jughead because there'd be no Jughead left, as many people have already observed online. But the EIC does offer him a job as a comic book writer if he can produce some good comics in the next, like, 5 days. And Jughead, chilling out with his friend Ethel, suggests that Ethel draw it because Ethel is now an aspiring artist and she's into horror comics as well. Jug will help her get a job once he's got the story. And they actually have a cute, like, being friends scene. It's nice. I'm happy for Ethel having one decent moment in this whole show. Don't worry, something terrible will happen by the end of the episode. Meanwhile, Archie is worrying about how he can't dance. So he asks Betty for lessons. And Betty's like, okay, I'll teach you the twist, Archie. And Archie sucks so bad at the twist that she decides to just teach him to slow dance. But of course, while they're slow dancing, it awakens something in them. Mostly Betty. Because, let's be real here, there's more evidence of gay Archie in this episode. Mainly in the way that he describes Veronica as she's an amazing star from Hollywood. And I know, justifiably, I'm gonna get busted for using that voice and phrasing, but I'm only directly quoting the way that KJ Appa delivers it. He delivers it once again, not in the tone of voice that heterosexual man would likely use to express his admiration and sexual interest in a woman, but in the way that a man who was excited by how stylish a Hollywood movie star could be would. And many of those men are gay. Meanwhile, at makeout point, Cheryl is menacing people, trying to make them buy tickets, and she discovers Midge and Fangs making out and also seems like smoking dope in a car. And of course, Cheryl's very upset about this. And then Kevin and Betty pull up because now that she's resolved her scene with Archie and that her mom came in and said, "Oh my God, you can't have boys in your bedroom. Oh, it's the 1950s." She's going out with Kevin because you can have boys in a car out on the town. Okay, all right. And Kevin is not having sex with her, much to her disappointment. He's trying to like her even though he's gay, but he's not succeeding, and I don't blame him. He accuses her of becoming a sex maniac, and she's like, "I just want you to go steady with me, Kevin." And it's bad. It's a big failure. And we find out the next morning at school when Kevin goes to practice this Kevin and the Crooner routine that he's not just amorphously gay. There's a hot guy at school named Clay Walker who also does music and is like really handsome. And Kevin kind of has a crush on him, and it seems like he might have a crush on Kevin too. Oh no. Meanwhile, Jughead successfully submits his story to Pep Comics. They like it, and he suggests Ethel as the artist. And they're like, "All right, fine, whatever, your friend can draw it." So now Jughead's got them both jobs in comics. Woo-hoo. Archie, still trying to get Veronica to go out with him, is like, "I know how to dance now, Ronnie." And she's like, "That's fine, but I'm having a little test of, not only can you dance, but can you make discourse with me? Can you have scintillating conversation? So you need to come over to the Pembroke tonight and we'll discuss things like art and politics." And Archie's like, "Oh shit, oh no, I can't handle this." And he runs off. And Betty, who was standing right over there, was like, "Oh, Veronica, you're so good at manipulating men. That's like very cool of you." And the way I'm saying it is like a kind of like, "I think you're hot." And Betty's like, I mean, Veronica is like, "Oh yeah, well don't worry, Betty. I also think you're really hot, but implicitly only. And let me give you some seduction advice so no one thinks that we're engaged in a homoerotic discourse here." But they kind of are. Meanwhile, Cheryl is upset because everybody's refusing to go to the sock hop because the serpents are now going to throw rotten eggs at anybody who goes because they wanted Fangs to play there instead of Kevin. So Cheryl goes to the new version of the White Worm, which is still the same old White Worm basement set, but now it's a beatnik coffee house. And she confronts Tony there. And Tony's like, "No, come on. Kevin is lame." Which is mean but true. Kevin is lame. Kevin is lame. You should hire Fangs to play at the sock hop. He's about to go and play on stage now. Just hang out here, watch him. Maybe we'll get to know each other. And Cheryl's like, "Okay." Back in the Archie plotline of who's Archie gonna take to the sock hop, he is too dumb to put his suit on right, but his mom helps him and finds his dad's old vintage suit. Mom is skeptical, though, of Veronica's morals, and she's sad about how Archie's dad died in the Korean War. She talks about how they went to the sock hop together, which gets you wondering, was it always the 1950s in Riverdale? When did Archie's mom and dad go to a sock hop together before Archie was born when they were teens? 1910? Um, did they have sock hops in like the 19 teens? 1920s? I don't know. Anyway, Archie's mom also talks about how Fred was a great poet and he wrote romantic poems to her to seduce her, and Archie's like, "Oh, I should do that," which he shouldn't. He's functionally illiterate. But he decides to write a poem about Veronica and he shows it to Betty, and Betty says, "Hand it over, Walt Whitman," because she's thinking of a poet and she's also thinking of famously a kind of gay poet. And unbelievably, Betty thinks the poem is good, and I don't believe this, and I will be proved right when Archie says the poem later in the episode. But nonetheless, he presses on with his flowers and his chocolates and his poem for Veronica, and he arrives at the Pembroke to find her wearing a crazy outfit with a huge bow on it. But it does look exactly like an outfit she'd wear in the comics, so they're not wrong. And she invites Archie in, but reveals it's not a one on one date. She invited all the hot guys to a salon where they would discuss politics. Eisenhower running for a second term, and Archie knows he is boned. Meanwhile, Betty talks to her mom, Alice, about how she's suddenly having sexual feelings about Archie. And Alice says, "No, no, don't let this trick you. You couldn't have sexual feelings for two guys at once. You're just upset because Kevin is so frigid. I'll talk to Kevin." And you're like, "Oh no. Someone save Kevin." Meanwhile, in the Ethel and Jughead plotline, Ethel's drawings are awesome, and Jughead's really excited about them, and so Ethel tries to make her move on Jughead, and Jughead, God love him, is oblivious. She's like, "Let's go to the sock hop, Jughead." And he's like, "What, as a bit?" She's like, "Yeah, sure." And he's like, "Okay. I bet they got good food." Jughead is an icon to me. But then Ethel gets in big trouble for having a boy over in her bedroom, just like Betty did. "Roberto, are you saying the sexual mores of the 1950s were too restrictive and obsessed with controlling female sexuality?" We'll talk more about this later. Back at Veronica's salon, Archie's not pulling his weight discursively, and No Eyebrows Julian Blossom is mocking him, and they're talking about Monet. Archie's humiliated when he admits that Monet is too challenging for him and that he prefers Norman Rockwell. Julian, with his fucking lack of eyebrows, insults Archie's suit and his dead dad, and they almost have a fight. Archie storms out and he throws his poem in the trash because his life sucks and he thought this girl was hot, allegedly, but all her friends are mean and she's probably just gonna go out with No Eyebrows Julian. Veronica goes to Archie's house the next morning to seek his forgiveness. Instead, she's confronted by Archie's mom, who's pissed at her for being so mean to Archie. And Archie's mom says verbatim, "Archie is a simple boy." He's so simple. He thinks it was his fault that there was a fight, but I know it was your fault because of the way you're just torturing him for fun. And it's true, Archie is a simple boy. He's just a little creature. But Veronica's not the only one facing a dressing down from a terrifying mom of Riverdale, because Kevin is having tea with Alice Cooper right now. And she's interrogating him about why he's not emotionally and or sexually satisfying Betty. And when he admits that he's just like, "Betty wants things from me, I just can't find it in me to give her," Alice assures him that sexual insanity is totally normal among teenage girls, and she provides him with the pin that Hal, her husband, gave her when they were teens to sublimate all their sexual urges, which again, was pinning a thing in the 19 teens? Or was it just always the 1950s in Riverdale? Anyway, this pin, which will serve as a substitute phallus when he used it to penetrate Betty's sweater, will sublimate their sexual urges and solve all of their relationship problems. And Kevin's like, "Okay, thanks, Mrs. Cooper." Speaking of sexual urges, Tony and Cheryl have now teamed up for the sock hop because Cheryl's agreed that Fangs is a better musical star. And again, they're flirting, but Cheryl's pretending she doesn't know that's what happens. Poor Ethel, now not only in trouble from her parents, but also has been taken to the principal's office and confronted by Principal Featherhead and Dr. Werther's, the school psychologist, about how she's drawing deranged, scary comic books in class for an alleged job. All very bad things for a charming young lady to do in this time. They give her a week of detention. But instead, she skips detention to go to Pep Comics with Jughead, and they get their job together and they let Ethel be an artist at the comic books, even though she's a girl. And the editor in chief does assume that they're boyfriend girlfriend, and Jughead's like, "Oh no, that'd be weird." And once again, Jughead's serving iconic. We love to see it. Oblivious J. And so they head home happy with their job, getting ready to go to the sock hop, not realizing that Ethel's going to be in huge trouble because she skipped detention and the principal called her parents and they're pissed. Meanwhile, Archie and Ronnie almost reconcile, but then they have a fight about how she's continuing to torment the various boys, and Archie storms away, hurt feelings, and when Veronica contemplates her fiendish torments of these fellows with Betty, Betty tells her about Archie's poem, and then she realizes Veronica and Archie aren't going to the sock hop together, so she could ask Archie. She heads over, and there's epic synth playing because it's still the 1980s somehow, even though it's the 1950s, even though it's the 2020s. But right before she can reach Archie and finally get with him, Kevin intercepts. And he takes her to the music room and he's like, "Oh my god, Betty, I'm so sorry for not sexually satisfying you. It's definitely not because I'm secretly gay. And this is a pin, and I'm pinning you now, and I love you. And we'll go to the sock hop." And it's physically killing him to say these things. And then when he tries to put the pin on her, he kind of freaks out about potentially touching her boob. And it's very understandable. That's the life of Kevin in 1955, though. Smithers is still alive, which I guess it makes more sense that Smithers is still alive in 1955 than it did in 2019 when he mentioned that he had fought in the Great War. It makes more sense that a veteran of the Great War would be alive in 1955 than 2019, but sure. Anyway, Smithers, still alive, still Veronica's butler chauffeur. He found Archie's poem in the trash and he gives it to Veronica, and she's like, "Oh my god, Archie's a sensitive soul." And then it's time for the sock hop. They all go to the sock hop except Ethel, who's in trouble at home with her parents, who are mad about how she skipped detention and she's drawing gory, scary comics and she's hanging around with Jughead. And Shannon Percy gets to say the line, "I'm not staying in my room. I'm going to the sock hop with Jughead." Which might be my new catchphrase whenever I leave somewhere is, "I'm going to the sock hop with Jughead." Because I am. I'm always going to the sock hop with Jughead in my mind. Anyway, at the actual sock hop in the story, Clay, still hot, still into Kevin, approaches him and is like, "Hey, Kevin, you're looking pretty good. Isn't Fangs cool? I'm sorry you got dumped, but he's pretty hot too." And Kevin's like, "Oh, I have to date Betty." Oh. Which again is fair. And then Fangs comes out on stage, and Fangs is doing his best Austin Butler in Elvis, doing an Elvis impression, and he sings Tutti Frutti, which I've always understood was a song about anal sex. So Roberto put two levels of thought into this, and so everybody dances to Tutti Frutti, and Drew Ray Tanner does a pretty good job of singing it. I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty good musical number, Riverdale standards. And everybody's having a good time at the dance. They're getting down to Fang's music. Jughead has eaten all the food from the buffet. Tony asks Cheryl to dance, and Cheryl's like, "OMG, okay," and they're having fun together. But Principal Featherhead is looking on, and his gaydar is alerting. And he's not happy about all this rampant and deviant teenage sexuality. And then Fangs shifts gears into the slow dance song, which is another 1950 song, but I've already forgotten which one it is. And Veronica goes up to Archie and is like, "OMG, Archie, I read your poem." And then she says the poem. And it's so bad. Want women, he's not. Want women, he is not. And she's like, "Won't you dance with me, Archie? Now we could reconcile for real." And Archie's like, "No." Which, good for you, Archie. Go, girl boss, Archie. He stands up for himself, and then he goes to dance with his mom because she's a chaperone at the dance. Good for Archie. But then Veronica dejected. That's the time that, of course, No Brows Julian makes his move on Ronnie. And she dances with him because she has nothing left to lose because she's already cast Archie aside. And everyone is dancing heterosexually to the slow dance song. Kevin and Betty, Archie and his mom. I guess that's not necessarily normatively heterosexual, but there it is. Uh, Veronica, Julian, other people I'm forgetting now. Um, but Clay and Tony are kind of sitting on the bleachers. They're drinking smuggled in alcohol and they're looking kind of wistful due to their struggles as double minority, as both gay and people of color. But we only talk about the gay part. The blackness is not really well addressed in this episode. Not that it was well addressed last episode when they talked about it either, but both both options are bad because it's Riverdale. And Cheryl's looking over at them and thinking about her struggles and how she definitely is into Tony and she has to admit to herself. And then Principal Featherhead creeps up on her and he says literally, "Ha! Boys and girls dancing in chaste harmony, just as God intended. Don't you agree, Miss Blossom?" And Cheryl's like, "Oh, yes, Mr. Featherhead." And she's sad about it, and Principal Feather is like, "Ha ha ha, my heterosexual agenda is 2/4 complete." But just then, just when you think, well, this was an episode about the 1950s, it advanced our themes, but it didn't really have anything like crazy and fucked up happen. Ethel bursts in her sock hop outfit. She's faint and she's soaked in blood. She's looking kind of crazy, and Jughead rushes over to her and he's like, "Oh my god, Ethel, what's going on?" And she says, "Something terrible has happened." And then cut to credits, and you're like, "Okay, alright, excellent. Good stuff. Um, Perfect. Phenomenal." And that's where the episode ends. The trailer for next week's episode picks up on none of these threads. It's all about how they're going to go over to Veronica's for a makeout party, and then they have crazy visions of like pansexual orgies, which is like good. We're getting back on track. We can't suppress the heart of the show much longer. Uh, Nonetheless, Wolf, by Riverdale standards, this was a slow paced episode, as I said at the top. I do think it continues to advance our core questions that we're approaching this season with, even though none of our protagonists remember their lives in 2019, 2023, 2050, whatever time it was in original Riverdale before we went back in time 67 years to the future, to the past. Nonetheless, our characters' true identities, their core feelings, their true sexualities, continue to kind of bubble to the surface and struggle to be contained within the repressive gender and sexual norms of the 1950s. Also, the relentless horrors of Riverdale, the evil, the compulsions to murder, and the unavoidable, like, dismemberments and slaughter that always occur in Riverdale uh, are begun at the very end of this episode because obviously something terrible happened, presumably to Ethel's parents, um, and that's why she's showed up and she's covered in blood. And at this point, I'm gonna assume because nobody was murdered in these first two episodes, we're gonna get back on track with at least one death per episode, which is the average for Riverdale. I think if you take the number of stated casualties by Riverdale episode, which is a page on the Riverdale fandom wiki, number of stated casualties per episode, it evens out to about maybe 1.5 killings per episode. And there are, as you may know, more than 100 episodes of Riverdale. So the slaughter in previous seasons has been mind-boggling, obviously. Um, and I expect the slaughter in this season to pick up quite quickly after this point. That's my main prediction. Um, I also expect to see more extremely awkward plotting on both Kevin and Cheryl's like coming out stories. I'll be interested to see because Roberto says that we're not going to spend this whole season in the 1950s. Allegedly, he didn't clarify anything further than that statement, so that could mean, literally anything. Literally anything. But I will be interested to see if they have a coming out arc here in the 1950s where, they get together with Clay and Tony respectively, or if we kind of come up to the edge of that and then, like, get sent back to the past, future, time, original time. So we'll see how that goes. Undoubtedly it will be cringe. Um we'll also see how that ties in with the mandate that Jughead received from Tabitha last episode about bending towards justice. And if our heroes if our heroes go on a quest to invent like 2020s gay rights in the 1950s, I think Roberto will have done his job. I think, like, what more can we really ask from Roberto at this point in terms of the shit that he would come up with? Oh god. Oh my god. It's gonna be so bad. Anyway, that's been this has been okay. All right, no, I'm fine. I got it. I got it. It's fine. This has been Ween Casts. Ween off the cuff. Thank you for listening. I am your Ween.